Mackenzie. Hey, this is Owen. Don't forget to like our show and subscribe.
This podcast is brought to you by the Love and Kindness Project Foundation. What is one thing that you could do to think, speak, or act kindly today? Go to loveandkindnessproject.org to learn more. Before we begin this podcast, if you or someone you know is in crisis or needs emotional support, there are tools that can help. So get yourself a pen and paper or open a note-taking app on your phone or computer. Feel free to pause this episode while you get yourself ready. The episode starts at 1 minute and 6 seconds. You can call Talk Suicide Canada at 1-833-456-4566. You can text 45645, which is coming in the fall of 2023. In Canada, you can also call 988, the Kids Help Phone at 1-800-668-6868. The Trans Lifeline in Canada is 1-877-330-6366. And in the United States, 1-877-565-8860, or call 911. You are not alone, and you do not have to be alone. I would like to honor and recognize the traditional and unceded territories of the Katzie, Kwantlen, and Semiahmoo nations on whose territory I live, work, and play. Welcome to We Are the ADHD Family podcast. This podcast is meant to chronicle our journey with ADHD, autism, and other discoveries along the way. I reach out to advocates, experts, individuals, and other families that want to raise their voices and empower those on their journey. My name is Mark Smeets, and I am passionate about removing barriers for others through creating connections and building on strengths and practical problem solving. I am married to Siobhan, a parent to 2 wonderful kids, and all of us have ADHD. I want you to feel like you have power and hope. And now, into the episode. If there's one thing I really like, is when the washing machine is just finished washing and the clothes are all ready to be put into the dryer. The next load was ready to go. I opened the door and realized the washing machine's empty. I thought I put the clothes in. Nope, not this time, Mark, not this time. Welcome to a new episode of We Are the ADHD Family podcast and the advocateurs. I'm not going to edit it out either. I just had an awesome conversation with a friend of mine, Karyn Ross, and that's who this episode is about today. Karyn and I have been friends for a number of years, and our families are relatively close. And we're going to get to a lot of the conversation focuses around kindness. And there are things that she and I both have not talked about very much. You know, our family's involvement in World War II, and that completely seems random, but completely appropriate for ADHD. But you'll see why we're talking about this stuff. But I wanted to record a little preamble in the beginning here because we go over a couple terms that I just want to clarify very quickly. So one of the terms that we talk about is lean, and that's Lean, not Lein. But lean is a process improvement methodology that it basically focuses on reducing the waste in a process, or you're stripping away the non-value added activities that are possibly taking away from the value that you're trying to bring to something. And I know in other podcasts, I've talked about the act of advocating as a process and being aware of what those things are. So when you look at a process, maybe the simplest thing that you can do, and maybe look at something that you're currently frustrated in where you're advocating in a school, is ask yourself or ask the teacher, what's the process to get, insert goal here? And strip away what those things are that are directly adding value, and identify what you have to do but shouldn't really have to do it, and then what's completely not adding any value to this. And I think if you look at advocacy from that point of view, then you begin to separate the person who you're talking to, the teacher, from the process that they're going to be trapped in. And Karyn and I go on about that. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. It was a really fun conversation. My guest today on the podcast is my friend Karyn Ross, and dare I say mentor as well. And yes, we're only doing the audio though.
Okay.
Okay.
So I'm making a heart hand symbol.
Now you know why she's my mentor. Um, when I started the podcast and the idea for it, I really wanted to have kindness be front and center in everything that I was doing in terms of any message I was putting out there. And if I look at my past work background and everything, that was always that was a big piece of just who I am and why am I denying the wanting to be kind to somebody, that I work with them or something like that. So I told Karyn just recently that I wanted to have the kindness thing more front and center. And that's why you hear in the beginning of all the episodes of how it's sponsored by Love and Kindness Project Foundation, because it's that important to me, and I know it's important to her. And this is why I think the two of us have gotten to know each other so well over the past couple of years. And she has been a mentor to me and a good friend of my wife and us as a family. So thank you for being just awesome. And yeah, so there you go. Um, I know all about you, but a lot of people won't know a lot about you. So maybe a little brief overview would help. And yeah, let's go for that.
All right, that sounds super cool. First of all, I'm going to say thank you for your kind words, and thank you for your friendship, and Siobhan also for her friendship and all the great work she does as our Western Canada Country Director for Love and Kindness Project Foundation. And although people will just be hearing the audio, you can see that I am wearing this beautiful Pride Kindness button that she designed for the foundation. And Mark, I am sure you will put the link about where people can order their kindness buttons at the end.
Oh yes. Oh, yes.
The show, cool. And so just a little bit about me. I am proudly Canadian, and I'm also American, and I live in the Chicagoland area, though I grew up in Canada, Ottawa, and Toronto. And so I lived 30 years in Canada and 30 years in the United States. And as well as being the founder and president of the Love and Kindness Project Foundation, which is a global 501c3 registered public charity spreading kindness person to person around the world by helping people think, speak, and act more kindly. I also own my own business, and I help leaders and organizations create better, more effective, efficient, and kinder ways to work. So that's a little bit about me.
And she's also an author of several books that we're probably going to be talking about just a bit. So what I wanted to do is dive into, and I have no specific questions, by the way, but I know where I'm kind of letting my brain wander a little bit this morning. I'm very curious to know the Karyn before you got into the process improvement side of things. Actually, that's a good thing to bring up. How we got to know each other. So years ago, when my father-in-law was in the hospital and eventually he passed away, after that point, I fell into process improvement by fluke. And Karyn was probably one of the first people I found on LinkedIn. And so one of the first people I found on LinkedIn that I could actually identify with, because seeing how you would talk about the not only a process but the kindness aspect of it, and that's what I was trying to do in the job that I was in at the time, was very important for myself. And at some point I reached out just probably to ask a question, and I know we sort of struck up a conversation and things kept going on for the longest of times. Little did I know how kind that the process improvement people that we know, I mean, like
Yeah.
I cannot believe how kind this community actually it really is. And I have not seen anything like this ever. And it's very it's very cool if you're if you're not improving, if you think process improvement is about cold analytics, no, you're wrong. It's not that at all. You have to start with the person. You have to look at those relationships. It's so critical. But that's how we got to, that's kind of our origins. When you, so were you always like this as a kid before you got into the process side of things?
Okay, so that's a super that's a super interesting question, and something really very interesting happened a little while ago, so that I'm able to actually answer this question in a very different way. So a little while ago, I posted a post on LinkedIn. I post, quite often, and it was something about process improvement and really the people side of it and kind leadership. And someone commented on my post, and they asked that if I was the Karyn Ross who grew up in Ottawa, in Nepean. And when I looked at the name of the person who commented, I was super excited because it was somebody that I was looking for a really, really long time. My childhood best friend
No
from
way.
kindergarten to like probably third or fourth grade until she'd moved away. And she
Wow.
has a very common name, especially I would say in
Yeah.
Canada, like a very common Canadian kind of name. And I'd been searching in a variety of ways on Facebook, and I hadn't been successful in finding the person. And then all of a sudden, here she is commenting on my post. And so I reached out and we got on FaceTime and we got to see each other. And I asked her, "How did you know it was like me? Like, what made you think
Yeah.
this post was me?" She said, "Because you were talking about kindness. And when we were children, the thing I remember about you is how kind you were." And that was so interesting to me because that was somebody else's reflection. And probably, looking back on yourself when you're growing up, you don't necessarily like think about, okay, was I kind? Was I this? Was I that? Right? It's maybe not part of your ideas about how you think about yourself as a child, but it was somebody else's words. I can tell you, growing up, I was always super passionate about making sure that everybody was included and that everybody
Mhm.
had a voice. So when I was in grade school, I guess there must have been an election going on in Canada, and we did some kind of mock election, and I created a party. And even though I was actually growing up the kid who was, not always fit in and kind of ostracized, and but everybody joined the party until one person in class that nobody liked said that they wanted to join. And
Mm.
so I said, everybody can be included. And all of the other kids left because they said they didn't want to do something with this person. And I said, that will be your choice. So that is one thing I can remember as a child, that inclusion and making sure that everybody was welcome is something that I remember about myself as a child.
How uh, is there something specific from being that young? Is that something that just, I guess, came natural, or do you think that was something that was taught?
I'm gonna say I think that it's a combination of combination of both. And actually now, having my own children who are, adults now,
Yeah.
30, almost 32 and almost 28, it's really interesting because I can see that mix of nature and nurture. So
Yeah.
I think that it was probably a combination of both both things. I think my parents, who, oftentimes weren't the kindest to me, but were very interested in social justice at the time and making sure that, they had a wide, range of kind of friend, uh, you know, groups. I probably got some of that from that. I grew up in a fairly Orthodox Jewish household, and there's a lot of focus on social justice and doing kindness in the world now
Mm.
in Jewish religion. And I think it's also probably just my own personality. The thing I also remember of being a child, I was pretty cheerful. I was pretty, the kind of personality I have now was probably, it's a combination of both. These
Yeah.
are super good questions. Nobody asked me this kind of question before on a podcast. So it's made me think. I love that.
This is like we were saying before. It's those evolutionary things it's the evolutionary conversations I love to have of where people start off and how you end up, and then what are the steps that you take to get there. Because I know I've always been curious, and I mean, we're kind of it's. I had a hard time trying to come up with what were all the things to sort of ask you about, but I really haven't asked you about much of that before. So I was super curious, and I'm really glad that you shared that. And it makes, like, from obviously not knowing you back from when you were that age, I can see that going on. And there's something in there that I know I identify with as a definitely as a kid, where you want to see everybody included. But to me, I was probably too young to sit there and have all the tools that I would now to be able to do that. Because I've never liked exclusion. Excuse me. I've never liked exclusion. I've always wanted to see people included, people happy. And it's the little things, the little, not catty's maybe the wrong word, but the superfluous, catty, um, thin social things that get in the way of that stuff that just grind me. So it's like, no, we're going to be kind to each other.
Here is a 20-second kindness break.
Here is a tip for thinking kindly. If you think it's not kind, or if it feels wrong, pause yourself and don't say it.
Hi, this is Siobhan from the Love and Kindness Project Foundation. Check out loveandkindnessproject.org and find other ways to carry out kind acts or start a kindness project of your own.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
it.
one of the things that's super interesting to me, and I've reflected on quite a bit as well, is that growing up, I was bullied a lot in school. I didn't look the way other people look. People can't see me, but I have dark hair and olive colored skin, and I grew up in a pretty homogenous area. I was one of, my sister as well, one of the only couple of Jewish kids in a school in which everybody was, some kind of Church of England or, more Christian background. And in grade school and middle school and high school, I liked art. I didn't, I was just super different. And I was treated unkindly in many ways. I can remember walking home from school and being beat up on the way home from school. And I think in those situations that there's the possibility, of course, to end up unkind yourself. Because and to turn anger inwards on oneself and say, I don't want to be this way. And then really interestingly, after I left high school, I went to York University and I did a undergraduate and master's degree in fine arts. And a really strange thing happened. All the things that made me unpopular and bullied that I, thought for myself looked different, all of those things that made me the brunt of people's anger and bullying. When I went to university, people were like, oh my goodness, you're so cool.
Yeah.
You know, and I had a really unusual, like totally the opposite, right?
Yeah.
And I was super popular and it was just a whole other experience. And I experienced a life in a very different way. And I think all of those things put together made me realize is that I was the same me. And I had a different experience based on how people reacted. And I didn't become unkind and mean to others. what became important to me was to really understand how to help others be kind, because I'd already walked a mile in my
Yeah.
own shoes, in the shoes of the person who had been hurt and bullied, right? And now, how could I teach those other people how to be kind, right? I don't believe people are innately kind. I believe they learn unkindness or kindness from the way they're treated by others, and especially their leaders, people in positions of power.
Yeah. I know, and I think I've talked with you about this before. I know I've talked with Siobhan about it, but um for me, I know I am the way that I am because how do I phrase this? I am the opposite of what I sort of saw and experienced growing up. I did feel excluded. I did feel that. And sort of as I mentioned earlier, is wanting to, bring people together and hear voices and hear those things. Um, it just takes, I think it just takes time to find, I think it takes time to find that resolve in you, to form that identity that this is who you or I are. Um, and then go from there. Because I think about, I mean, I was bullied as well, but I just think about the, the reasons of why you or I were bullied are obviously exclusive to you and I, and anybody else listening for that matter. But there's a moment in there where you're having that identity come through, and that some people I think make a conscious choice. I don't know how the other side of it goes, but the fact that when you got into university, like going for your fine arts, you were that person. You knew you were that person. And that was it. There was no question. And quite honestly, it sounds like you were that person a long, long time before even that happened. So it, which I just thought is, I just think is really just I think it's cool. And it's interesting because, I mean, the podcast is about, I mean, it's our family's journey with all this stuff. And I think a lot of kids that are, whether they're autistic, ADHD, Down syndrome, they get made fun of because they quote unquote look different or what have you. And no one can take, to me at least, I don't know, like no one can take away your identity. You are who you are, and don't apologize for it.
Exactly. And the thing
Yeah.
is, you're supposed to be who you are. And I think, and this actually brings me to a point that I think is really important about kindness. Kindness is a choice. Kindness is about action, and kindness is human behavior, right? So at whatever circumstance we come from, whatever background, whatever, that we all have choices to make in life. And actually, I always say kindness is a practice that takes practice, because in many circumstances we have to choose to be kind. So short story, which I think it was really impactful for me and really, I think, illustrates this. So my husband also comes from a Jewish family, and his grandfather came to the United States, actually, and then immigrated to Canada. He had been a traveling salesman. He was originally from Poland, and he traveled all around, and he actually saw Hitler speaking, and he understood the shape of things to come. And he wanted to immigrate.
Yeah.
He was, and so he actually got the paperwork, and he sent it to a relative in the United States who wouldn't sponsor him for whatever reasons.
Yeah.
So he was carrying this paperwork, and he was in a bar in somewhere in Germany one night, and American businessman did a random act of kindness and signed his paperwork and sponsored Grandpa to come to United States.
Wow.
And so then, of course, he had my father-in-law who's turning 80 this weekend, and they had 2 kids and a variety of other children, and I got married and have my own children, right?
Did they keep in touch?
No.
No.
So Grandpa never saw that person again. The rest of Grandpa's family were sent to the concentration camps. And he had one sister who was extremely well educated, which, at that time was not so common for women, but she'd gone to university and she was sent to the concentration camps. And I don't know if you know this, but when people who were in the concentration camps traveled to different cities, they would look up in the phone book for names of people that they'd known in the camps to try to find their relatives. So one day we got a call from someone who had been in the concentration camp with Grandpa's mother and father and sisters. And that person said that all of the rest of Grandpa's family had been killed except this one sister. And she'd survived until the day of liberation. And as she was running towards the entrance of the camp, as the camp was being liberated, a Nazi soldier shot her in the back and killed her. So a random act of kindness brought my husband's grandfather safely here. A random act of unkindness, a choice, not a random act, a choice, right? And the person who signed Grandpa's paperwork made a choice. And in everything, we have a choice. In situations that are unbelievably difficult, in situations that are easy, we can choose to practice kindness, right? To use our empathy, to put ourselves in someone else's shoes and understand how they might be feeling from their perspective, and then our compassion to want to do something to alleviate their suffering, and then to take an action, to do something which will create a positive outcome for that person. This is a practice. It is not easy to do.
No.
But we have to practice, right? And kindness is a choice. And the more we practice, we show other people how to do it. And we help give them strength in their practice. It's a lot easier, I'm going to tell you, to be unkind, to lose your temper, to shout at someone, to do all of those.
I mean, isn't the, oh gosh, I can't remember how many muscles it takes to smile, but isn't it something like it takes, I don't know, like it takes like 10 muscles to frown, but 4 muscles to smile or something like that? I know the number's wrong, but similar kind of thing.
Exactly. So how do we help people make the choice to become kind? And many people think about doing something kind, and oftentimes that takes us out of our comfort zone, right? Can you imagine this person sitting in a bar in Germany must have been out of their comfort zone signing something for a person that they didn't know. That person could have come to the States and who knows, right?
And I mean, so what I find interesting about that, very, very interesting, is for anybody that doesn't know, my family's Dutch. My Oma and Opa fought. Actually, I don't even know if you know this stuff yet. My Oma and Opa fought in the Dutch resistance. That's how they met, because Opa got injured and Oma was a nurse, so she was rescuing people as the Nazis tried to pick them off. In Holland. Anyways, my mom's parents escaped in a, gosh, what was it? She's told me a bunch of times before. Escaped in a rail car, I think it was, as well. So I growing up, probably very much like you. I sort of, my dad will say he grew up in the shadow of World War II. I feel like I definitely grew up in the shadow of World War II as well. What I find very interesting about that story, and for some reason it doesn't shock me, and I know, and I think I know why. There's when when you're in a place like that, people, I mean, Holland's generally a friendly place. Germany's generally a friendly place. Not, that's not really an issue. The knowing people knowing each other, though, there are just some things that I have found in my life where you have, what's it called? They just show up randomly out of the blue. Or someone will purposely, and I know my dad's told me stories like this, somebody who used to be friends with back maybe when he played hockey has now contacted him 50 years later.
Mhm.
It's a very common, it feels like it's a very common European thing to do. And the phone book thing that you had mentioned to me, I had heard that before, but
Yeah.
again, it feels like that's almost just part and parcel of the way Europe sort of was. And I think it's kind of, I think part of it has to do with the fact that it's so borderless over there. I mean, you just going from Germany to Holland is crossing the street.
Mhm.
Going from Holland to Belgium is
Yeah.
crossing the street. It's funny how that works out. The question, something I'm very curious about, when you did that first book with Mike Rother.
Oh, with Jeff Liker.
Oh, Jeff, sorry. I have Mike Rother on the brain for some reason today. But when you did that first book, because I have not read it, but I am curious, because that was about, not so, I was going to say, I don't want to say call it about the service industry per se, but were you putting kindness things into that when you were going through that process of what you would write? Because I don't know how you two split up the writing duties.
Oh, so Toyota Way to Service Excellence. So Jeff and I would say, met through kindness, because when I came to the United States, we came on a treaty NAFTA visa, and then my husband was on a student visa, and then he got a job here, but we had to wait numerous years before I could get a work permit or green cards. And so I was an at-home mom. And so I stayed at home and I raised children, even though I had this master's degree and I thought I was going to be an art professor. And then, of course, I had 14 blank years on my resume, and it was not that easy to get a job. But I went to work in frontline customer service, because actually I like customer service and I like helping people. It's a kind of thing. And actually, what happened was that I found that I actually worked in a very unkind environment from the management perspective. And also, people who call on the phone for customer service are not necessarily all that kind either. And so there were about 60 people doing this frontline customer service. And although people can't see this, I'm going to say I'm holding up a box of Kleenex, because everyone had a box of Kleenex on the edge of their desk, not so that they could blow their nose when they had a cold, but so that they could wipe their eyes when they cried on a daily basis when a customer called to scream at them that they'd made a mistake or management was unkind as well. And so I thought, and this is where my art background comes in, I thought there's got to be a better way to do this, right? And it's just got to, as artists, we're super creative people, we solve problems. And so I heard the word Kaizen floating around, and to make a very long story short, my fabulous mentor, Leslie Hinkler, who was doing head of, lean in another part of the company, helped me. And she heard about what I was doing and trying to make things better, because I was teaching myself. And she said, "Can I just come over there and help you?" And so she showed me that kindness. And then I started reading books, and I was reading all kinds of books about process improvement. And Jeff Liker's book, The Toyota Way to Lean Leadership or Continuous Improvement, came out. They're both in the same year, so I don't remember which book it was, but I had a question. And so I decided I'm going to send Jeff, I looked up his email on the internet. I decided I'm going to send him an email with my question. And so, of course, here I am, some frontline customer service person, self-taught, doing all of this writing to one of the most famous people in this area. And I typed up the email, then like my finger, like I was like, okay, afraid, you got to hit submit. And then I don't know, there's two things that could happen. Either, it won't respond and I'll have, spend a few minutes putting down my thoughts, or he will respond. So 10 minutes later, Jeff responded. And we started a whole entire conversation. And we just talked all about process improvement, and we got to know each other. And 5 years later, I'd left the frontline customer service. I was actually working in process improvement. And Jeff said, I want to write a book about process improvement in services. And so we wrote it together. And so his initial kindness of it, again, answering my email. So when people say, oh, but it's so easy to talk to you, all I have to do is send you a note on LinkedIn. And you say, oh, let's talk to each other. Well, I learned that from somewhere, right? I learned that from Leslie, who said, oh, let me come over there and help you. Flew from Rochester, New York to Chicago to help me, right? From Jeff, who's like, oh, let me just help you. We learn that kind of behavior. We can learn unkindness from those who lead us. We can also learn kindness from those who lead us, right? And I think a lot of us in the process improvement community, we've actually experienced that kindness from people who are more senior to us, and we pass that on, right?
Yeah.
We absolutely pass that on because we have learned that this is the way to be. This is the way that's going to make a kinder, better world.
And it's funny because I know when I was at my first, I just call it my first real job, which happened to be customer service, but it was the senior directors up on the third floor, because I was on the second floor, and God forbid you went up to the third floor, but I had a good enough relationship with a lot of them because I of all the packages I found. It's like, no, Mark's one of the few that's allowed to come up there without question. Don't harass him. Anyways, they're the ones that taught me those sort of things. And it wasn't, I was just trying to be kind when I worked in general. And in something like, especially in something like freight, where you're, constantly being yelled at because something's late or a package has gone missing or what have you. I mean, believe me, I know I really have, I've heard and dealt with it all, folks. To have those executives show me and teach me the things that they did, and not only that, just by some of the actions that they did. And I remember telling an early mentor a long time ago, he came to a union meeting. He was an area director, went to the union meeting and met with the drivers and a bunch of us. And he gave out his cell phone. I'm like, look, if there's a problem, just call me and we'll deal with that. I'm just like, and I'm looking at Tony and just going, what in the world? And I had not really seen that action before. And I told him that years ago, just that because it made such an impression on me, because I was young. And if you've got someone this senior that can be that kind, then and they're serious and they mean it. Why is it so hard for many other many other groups of people to sit there and do that? And I think, and when I sit there and I give that example, what it comes up to me is when I think about the school system and the exclusion stuff that goes on up here, excuse me, and having to, have kids included in school activities and having teachers trained and stuff like that. There's so many little things that you can do to show kindness to help make somebody's life easier. And it's not difficult, I don't think. Which yeah.
Well, I don't think so either. And I think that you're saying the really important thing is kindness is about action, right?
Yeah.
And when other people show us how to act kindly, it makes a huge difference, because so often people say to me, but if I'm kind, isn't someone going to take advantage of me? Isn't somebody going to walk all over me? And isn't it going to be seen as weakness? And I really thought a lot about that, because it's so strange to me, because oftentimes taking an action to be kind, which means that you have to put yourself out of your comfort zone. Oh, or something that might inconvenience you, like someone gave you their cell phone number, and actually, guess what? Now you actually might call it or
Yeah.
text
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
right? Which will require the person to take time out of their whatever they're doing to answer and talk to you or text you or help you.
Yeah.
That takes a huge amount of strength, right?
Yeah.
To not just think about yourself. Kindness means that you need to consider others. And it doesn't mean that you just have to say yes to everything. If something doesn't go with your values, you shouldn't say yes to it. It doesn't mean you need to be silent if somebody is acting in a way that you don't like. Kindness means that you have to take an action that's going to have a positive effect or impact
Yeah.
on someone else for their perspective. So if somebody is actually doing something dangerous or somebody is actually saying something that's hurting someone else, the kind thing to do that's
Yeah.
going to have a positive impact is to actually step up and have the strength and the courage to say something and do something that's going to stop that, right?
Well, and there's also the other aspect too of, and I know I do this a lot, is I try to take a step back and say, number one, what am I actually being asked to do to show kindness to something or whatever that is? But I always tend to ask, what's the process? What's failing? What's falling apart? Why? It's the why. And, I will have somebody, I'll ask somebody if they want me to do something, why do we have to do it like this? What are the events that took place to get there? And to get that context, I think is critically important because it's going to I think it shapes your response. And for you and me that are naturally inquisitive people anyways, um, to sit there and to sit there and put that aspect in, I think it shows another form of kindness to the other person because you're giving them a platform, your ears and your thoughts and your attention to trust that you have their best interests at heart. And I think when especially when you're doing something like you're advocating in schools for our kids, and I know we haven't talked about your kids and stuff, but like I know advocating on Owen's side of things, and even Kenzie as of this morning too, um, being able to find out that other person's perspective before you reply, I think is a huge thing. It really is. And it's bridged many gaps, I know, for me.
I agree. And the second act kindly practice in my book, The Kind Leader, is listen with open eyes, open ears, open mind, and an open heart.
Yeah.
Right? Because the if the roots of kindness are empathy and compassion, the way to practice empathy is to actually listen to what someone else's perspective is and what someone else's thought process is and what someone else's experience is. And I always say open eyes because so much of body language is carried, so much of communication is carried on body language, and you look around at people's surroundings and you go to where they are. And
Yeah.
open ears because you have to listen to the tone of voice and denotative and connotative meanings. And then open mind because lots of times people just tell you things you don't want to hear and you
Yeah.
don't like and you don't agree with. And then open heart, because how can you understand that person has had there's some reason they've come to the conclusions that they've had and taken the actions that they've taken, right? And then taking an action that's going to create something positive out of that, you're going to have to open your heart to do it. So actually, and it takes a lot of practice. So I myself was reading something this morning and I thought to myself, oh my goodness, that's so ridiculous. And then I thought, well, why would you put that kind of judgment that. Like, and so often even our own self-talk or, as we get older, we tend to find, things are confirmation bias that go with what we already believe, right? Where in fact, actually, we need to listen with open eyes, open ears, open mind, and open heart, and listen for then those little judgmental voices. I don't have to be
Is
right about everything. The thing is, somebody else can just have an alternate opinion. It just doesn't make a difference. If their way is not causing a harm to someone, if my way is not causing a harm, what does it matter if they don't believe the same thing that I believe?
I'm curious about something. I know what it is in my brain. I'm wondering what it is for your brain too. Do you see like do you see this as I'm going to ask it wrong. The do you see it as a process? In other words, um, like maybe the only way I can do is explain sort of where it fits in my head. When I think about a process of some kind, the if I was so I'm gonna segue and I'll come around to it, and I swear my ADHD brain's not gonna let me mess this up. Last night, Owen, we were going to bed, and he said to me that he forgot that he had a word search for homework to do, and I was like, okay, well, that's fine. Is it downstairs? We can wake up early and we can go after it. Anyways, it turns out he left it at school. And so I thought about when he was talking, he started blaming his ADHD and autistic brain. And I said, look, you're not wrong. I said, you're right. It is your ADHD brain that's doing this because it's keeping yourself organized and all this kind of stuff. I said, I went through the same thing. I always go through the same thing. And so when I see a process of something that's gone wrong, or something where you can swap out different actions, I view it as a process. And I
Mhm.
look at things maybe visually, maybe writing things down, maybe it's a phone thing, just the method to which you use. So I'll finish the own story afterwards. But does your brain work in that way where it's almost like a slot machine or flow chart where you just go, oh, how can I think kindly, how can I speak kindly, or how can I act kindly? And then you're just going, which one is it, which path am I going to take first? Is that your brain like mine is?
I don't think so. I
Okay.
think that I got the actually, the reason I don't think so is my husband tells me that all the time. I got kind of the artist brain that goes doot, 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 and
Okay.
I got a million balls in the air and they're coming together in different ways.
There's
However,
that part of it too. There's that part of it for me too. I get the little slot machine of things where it's just like it's this and then do. It's like I go between both. But
and then
anyways,
my husband will always say, how did you get to that? Like, could you just explain what went on to get to that? Or why did like we were talking about this, why did you say that? So at four
it's
within
okay.
like
Siobhan
four
will ask me the same question too. Like, how did you get from here to there? And then she's like,
exactly.
the look of confusion on their faces is like, what? Why?
I do think though that I have a very set process of how to practice, right? And actually, it's written down in the Kind Leader. And it's one of the reasons I wrote the book. So, since I know the first thing I'm probably going to do, because our brains are hardwired for negativity bias, since the first thing I know I'm probably going to think something unkindly, I'm very conscious of when I hear something again, like this morning when I hear myself thinking, oh, that is ridiculous. I'm thinking, okay, how can I change that to assume positive intent? Right. And before I'm going to speak, especially if I'm angry or frustrated or know that there are some things, just like everybody else that trigger me, like, you know, that I say, okay, I have to breathe and I have to do the box breathing and I have to pause or I have to walk away or I can't respond to this email right now because it will be unkind. right? And so I do practice those things. And the reason I always say kindness is a practice that takes practice, and kind leadership is a practice that takes practice, and kindness is about action. Sometimes it's about stopping yourself. The action is stopping yourself, right?
Yeah.
Is that it does take practice. And the amazing thing is that anything we practice, we actually tend to get better at it over time,
Yeah.
right? We learn
Yeah.
new things about it, and we have we great introspection and reflection, and we learn things about ourselves, and we can use our PDCA, plan, do, check, act cycle to say, oh, well, maybe if I, try this, it'll lead me to a kinder result. But we actually have to, so I would say for that, I do have a very strong process. Does it work 100% all of the time? Absolutely not. And then I need to remember to be kind to myself too.
Well, and I think that intentional pause, and I think that's something you and Katie really drilled home really well, because I think it was you two that did that for me. Um, the Katie I mean is a friend of ours, Katie Anderson. This is like the third time I've name dropped her in my shows. the But yeah, taking that intentional pause to know whether or not you're going to, um, what sort of the right response or right action, or not, the right is the wrong word, but what path or what action you're actually going to end up taking. It takes practice to do that, and it's a every day, every 5 minutes sort of thing.
It's true. And we're in a society and culture in which everything is sped up, and oftentimes people are thought to be smarter if they can respond quicker, right? All of those kind of things. You might hear a little flippy flapping from Big Karma, who is
Just
who's
woke up.
found. Yeah, he just woke up from his dog nap over here. But we tend to value people who are quick thinking, who are quick speaking, who can zip off that one liner, whether it's kind or not. And oftentimes we don't value the person who says, let me just pause to think about this.
Yeah.
Right. But in that pause, you have time to consider, to make a choice, to be kind, right? Because you can say, okay, in your thought process, you can say, okay, if I say this, the person might perceive it like this, and here's the possible effect, right? The negative or positive. If I say this, it could have this other effect. And so you have to think, okay, kindness is about creating a positive outcome for someone else. And
When
that
No, go ahead.
pause is that thought process. And again, the more you practice, the faster it speeds up, but it's super important.
Well, and just that thing you just said of kindness, it's really about creating the kind space for someone else. I think is when you look at advocacy, I think especially that, and just the definition of that term being, you're trying to you're trying to influence policy and change through policy, as opposed to activism, which is the opposite of that, which is more action than anything else. Um, Creating, I think, when we're, especially when you advocate for kids, you're really trying to break those barriers down. And the one thing I know I tell parents a lot is I'll say, make sure you know what you're asking for to begin with. But how can you but when you're talking to that teacher, you're talking to that administrator, or that, person in the school district or what have you, or anybody for that matter, how do you make it a safe space for them to say, to be open and to see your point of view? And it's that's where I think it sort of becomes about them in that way. Um,
Yeah. And
yeah,
a lot of times people haven't been in a space where they've considered other possibilities, And we all have to be conscious that we're unconsciously influenced by all different kinds of systems that we've grown up in, right? And we tend now to think of a computer system, but actually they're political systems, right? And it's super interesting because I
Social.
spent 30 years of my life in Canada, which is one political system, and 30 years of my life in the United States, which is totally a different political system,
Yep.
right? And it's really interesting for me to look at those two things. People grow up in different religions. Religions are systems. They teach you all different kinds of things. Then you go to school, and depending where you go to school, now you're in a system that's teaching you all different kinds of things. Maybe you play a sport. That's a system. And as we grow up, we're unconsciously influenced by those systems. So a lot of times, actually, especially in school systems, because people are often taught to be rule followers, right? We like rule followers.
Yep.
Team players, rule followers,
Yeah.
right? That someone will tell you something is impossible. Like when you go to talk to the teacher, the administrator to advocate, they'll just simply tell you something's impossible, but actually it's not really impossible. But actually that's all they know, right? Or it might be difficult to change a policy. It might be difficult to work around the rules or do something for one child. But
Yeah.
they're stuck in systems too. They're just simply stuck in systems too. And when you show them kindness, so last night I went to get my updated COVID booster, and I went over to Walgreens, and there was there'd been a scheduling problem, so I was supposed to go to one Walgreens, then I had to go to another Walgreens, and they were really surprised because we showed up on time, my husband and I, with our papers all filled out. And then there was a young pharmacy tech who was having some problems working in the system, and the pharmacist helped them. And finally, she gets to us, and it's time for our shot. And we're cheerful and happy. And I gave her a kindness button, one of these, the little green background with a red heart, and said, "Thank you for kindness." And it was like probably 6:30 or 6:45 at night by that time, and I'm sure that she'd had a super long day, and she said, "Oh my goodness, you don't know how much I appreciate this."
Yeah.
And how just saying thank you for I'm just doing my, and it really took me right back, and this will bring us full circle in our conversation. It really took me right back to working in frontline customer service for 7 years.
Yeah.
Right? That tiny amount of kindness, and I could just imagine, people are not feeling well when they're going to the pharmacy, they're tired, they're grumpy, they're in a hurry, their kid is sick, they're whatever it is. Oftentimes, they're not kind.
Yeah.
But just that little extra added moment, that thank you for giving me the vaccine. It doesn't matter if it's her job.
Yeah.
It's right for chatting while doing it, for helping the young person learn their job so other people can get help.
It's those little things that make a difference when you're having those conversations too. Maybe a nurse is giving you the shot, but the person that you've been talking to that's been getting frustrated through the system, you sit there, you talk to, as you're done your shot, hey, thanks for the conversation, or thanks for something like that. Those are the I think are the little things that are easy to practice, where it's really a big deal. Or when, like, another way of doing it too is, I know if I'm leaving the schools, if my kid's school in that case and I'm not working there, I will, I'll say to the secretaries and whoever, I'll just say, thank you for everything today. And, that's sort of it. And it's nice for people to hear that kind of stuff. And that's another easy way to sit there and practice that, I think.
Right. And the more you practice that, because everyone is in a hurry. Everyone has things they
Yeah.
have to get to. The people who are
It's like,
doing their job are in a hurry. But we
yeah.
could actually just stop for a second and say thank you, or smile and say, "Hi, how's your day today?"
And it's not a case of it being hard per se. This is like you and I said to each other the other day, last week. It's not a case of it's hard work. It's just a different kind of work. ultimately.
Exactly.
So,
And the more you practice anything,
yeah.
the easier it gets. The number one, the very first think kindly practice is assume positive intent. And I think for most people, this is really one of the hardest, but actually it's the one that I practice the most because as the scheduling person from Walgreens called me and said, I'm sorry, there was a process problem. The Walgreens system actually scheduled appointments during pharmacists' dinner time, and now we can't take you at that time. And I could hear the person who called, in the tone of his voice, I could hear the fear. And I could put myself right back in that chair in 2006 of customer going to scream at me because, and I just thought, oh my goodness, this poor person, all he has to do now is, he didn't make the scheduling mistake. It's an automated mistake. And now he has to call every single person. And he's just sitting there in fear, waiting for someone to yell at him. Every single one of us has a choice. We cannot control many things around us, but we can control how we act. We can control how we react. We can control how we speak. And we can control, to a certain extent, our thoughts. Many thoughts arise, but guess what? As human beings, we don't actually have to accept those thoughts. We can change them. So before I have to go and let Mr. Big Karma the dog out because he's been sitting here kindly helping me with my work for a long time. Before I let him out, that's the thing that I really want to ask people. I want to ask them to please
That's cool. Yeah.
remind yourself that it is your choice. Kindness is your choice. You have a choice every single day to act, react, speak, and think kindly. Please practice. You won't be perfect. I'm not perfect. I make many kind of mistakes every day. Then we get to apologize to people and practice again. But if you start practicing now, say hi to the person working behind the counter. Say thank you to the secretaries at the school. If you start practicing those small things, it will get easier. And your tiny act of kindness, your tiny word of kindness will make an absolutely huge positive difference and make a kinder, better world for us all.
And I think the last thing too is that you got to separate the systems from the person, and you have to know what that person is in. You have to know that there's the system overall, but also what that person has control of within their world and what they have no control over everything else. And I think once you practice those things and you practice that awareness, I think it becomes better. I think you can do it easier too.
We assume positive intent. The truth is, 99% of people absolutely doing their best with the best intentions. Yeah. Cool.
Karyn, thank you for everything, and thank you for coming on. And this has been a fun conversation. And
I agree. Best podcast I have been on. So I'm making the heart hands again, and I'm going to say I'm sending you and Siobhan and the kids a big hug, and we'll talk again soon.
absolutely. All right. Have a good rest of the night.
You
Day.
too.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to our show.
If you're hearing this message, you've reached the end of the episode, and for that, I want to say thank you. I hope you have enjoyed what you've heard and are walking away with newfound knowledge.
We are the ADHD Family.
See change. See you soon for a newfound knowledge. I have 3 things to ask of you. Number 1, if you have any comments, questions, or guest ideas, please leave a comment on the Facebook page. Number 2, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps people find us. And number 3, if you want to be a guest on the show or know someone who would make a great guest, contact me through our Facebook page. This podcast is open to everyone. You don't need to be an expert, just passionate and want to see change. The opinions expressed by the host and guest are not associated with any employer or organization unless otherwise stated.